Hi, and welcome to the fourth part of our online resource on social impact investment readiness. For those of you who are looking at these videos for the first time, my name is Jeremy Harris and I am a Director in the Office of Social Impact Investment. I would like to start this video by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which this video is being recorded, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present and future. Before we get started, I'd like to recap the previous three videos and what was covered in those. Under part 1, we provided a very basic introduction to what social impact investment is. And in parts 2 and 3, we took you through in some detail the essential elements and principles for developing a social impact investment proposal. In the second video, we looked at defining the social issue and how to identify an appropriate target cohort. The third video, we looked at the elements of your service and in particular, what a good program logic looked like. And then we moved on to the areas of understanding the outcomes that you wanted to achieve and how to rigorously measure those outcomes. In this final video, we will discuss the organisational capabilities that are required to develop a social impact investment proposal and to also implement a social impact investment, and the elements of financial assessment which is necessary to understand whether your social impact investment proposal is feasible. There are three elements that constitute a social impact investment framework. The first element is defining the problem, and that was the topic that we covered in video 2. The second element of a social impact investment framework is providing a solution, and the 4 topics under that element were covered by video 3. This final video addresses the third element of the framework, which is addressing feasibility. And when we consider feasibility, we need to consider the feasibility and the capacity of an organisation to have the skills to develop a proposal and deliver a solution, and also the financial feasibility. To finish the video, I'd like to introduce the concept of a rate card approach. This is new to New South Wales, but it is something that has been extensively used in the United Kingdom previously, and it is something that we would like to take forward in New South Wales. As you may already know, the organisational capabilities required to develop and deliver a social impact investment are different to those that you would traditionally see in a not-for-profit organisation. These different skill sets reflect the different nature of the contracting arrangement and the level of detail that goes into negotiating the contract, agreeing the evidence and outcomes, and the ongoing governance that is required to successfully implement a social impact investment. While this may seem daunting at first, I can assure you that the benefits from adopting a social impact investment mentality to service delivery far outweigh the additional costs and resources that are required to deliver an investment or deliver a service under this arrangement. For example, frontline service delivery was previously controlled and maintained by service specifications. Under a social impact investment, there is the opportunity to continuously improve and in real time look at what is working to engage families and individuals and look at what needs to change in order to achieve better outcomes. Rather than having limited engagement under a traditional acquittals type contracting arrangement, a social impact investment contract is very much more a partnership with government. This requires a strong relationship to be developed by the contract managers and the service providers, and really enhances the ability of both parties to work together to achieve the best outcomes possible. There is also the need to have very strong negotiation skills. This is particularly in relation to the development of the implementation agreement or the contract under which the services will be provided, and also when considering any commercial terms that you as the service provider may look to put in place with the investors who are helping support the financing of the social impact investment transaction. Social impact investments require a considerable amount of decision making which is based on evidence and outcomes. This means making greater use of the data that you already collect and potentially collecting some different sources of data. From an organisation's perspective, this means you need to have really strong systems, people and processes in place to ensure quality data collection and analysis are undertaken. And finally, as I mentioned earlier in the different partnership approach to the contract management, there is really strong governance and reporting in social impact investment. And therefore, organisations need to be able to have the people in their organisation with the skills to look at their legal and financial structures and to be able to talk to their intermediary partners, their investors and their agency partners as well. So when you as a service provider are considering whether social impact investment is right for your organisation, and from a capabilities perspective, there are some key questions that you need to ask yourself. Do I have the skills in-house? And if there are gaps, should I fill these by bringing them in-house, or do I need to buy consultation and specific expertise for particular elements of the negotiation and the delivery process? Am I served by better having long-term partnerships with intermediaries and my financial advisors? And have I fully factored in the costs of these services and these additional skills and capability into the financial costs and the costs of delivering my service? It's important that these elements are covered off in order for an organisation to be appropriately placed to put forward a proposal that accurately reflects the potential costs and the potential returns that they can gain from a social impact investment. In the previous slide, I introduced the term intermediary. An intermediary is an organisation that can provide substantial independent advice to help organisations that are not familiar with social impact investment to develop a proposal and also assist with the ongoing implementation and monitoring of that investment. Intermediaries play an important role in the design and implementation of social impact investments. The role and responsibility of an intermediary varies depending on the capabilities of the other stakeholders in the partnership. These may include providing technical advice such as defining a target cohort, advising on financial structures, defining social outcomes measurement and developing a counterfactual. They may also help structure the outcomes contract and provide support in developing the contractual terms. Often, intermediaries will work as the go-between and the organisation that engages the investors. They are there to assist with the capital raising, the marketing of the investment, and the ongoing engagement with investors throughout the term of the contracting arrangement. And finally, an intermediary may be engaged to assist with the governance and reporting and to provide ongoing support during the implementation of your social impact investment. As discussed, organisations need to have the ability to negotiate an outcomes contract and also to manage the ongoing legal and financial structures throughout the life of the social impact investment. It may therefore be necessary to have particular legal expertise brought in not only during the development of the proposal and the negotiation of the implementation agreement, but also to provide some ongoing support throughout the life of the social impact investment. The reason this legal expertise is required under social impact investments is that they involve a number of different contracting arrangements. There will be the arrangement between the service provider and the agency. There may be a special purpose entity that is established to hold the funds provided by the investors. And there will need to be a contract between the service provider and that special purpose entity. And lastly, that special purpose entity may have legal arrangements with the investors directly. If this is all sounding a little bit complicated and complex, then I encourage you to go on to the Office of Social Impact Investment website and look at the range of legal templates and resources that we have available to you. In this slide, we try to demonstrate the different types of contractual arrangements in the 3 examples that we have been using throughout our videos. In the Resolve, the Newpin and the On-Track Social Impact Investments, you can see that there are differing contractual arrangements between the agency that has commissioned the work, the service provider, the potential need for an intermediary, and also the organisation that is engaged to undertake the assessment of the accuracy and completeness of the outcomes measurement, and therefore what payments are able to be made to the investors. Let's now move on to the process of undertaking the financial assessment for your proposal, and also an introduction discussion of the rate card approach. Each of the stakeholders involved in a social impact investment, be it government, investors or service providers, have a set of considerations to take into account when looking at the feasibility of the social impact investment proposal. From the government perspective, we are looking to deliver better outcomes for vulnerable people, and this translates into reducing the need and demand for high-cost acute service delivery. We also need to look at the value for money and the level of risk sharing. For government to enter into a social impact investment contract, it needs to be clear that there is the potential and the opportunity to achieve a greater than $1 return for every dollar that the government invests in the contract. This value for money and risk sharing consideration leads directly into government's willingness to pay for a service or whether it should invest its money elsewhere. From the perspective of an investor, they will be seeking to achieve a social and financial return for the capital that they invest in the transaction. The composition of the social and financial return that an investor is willing to take depends on their tolerance to put their capital at risk, their ability to accurately assess that risk, and the types of returns that they're willing to take and receive. For example, do they want all of their capital to be protected? Do they need market rates of return, such as a 5% return for their capital investment? Do they require considerably more return, such as 10% return, which is commensurate with the level of risk that they're taking? Or are they more socially interested and more inclined to take below market rates of return? From the service provider's perspective, it is very important to understand the likelihood of achieving the outcomes as stated in your proposal. This is important because the formation of the payments to service providers is by way of a standing charge and an outcomes payment. We will go into more detail in future slides the composition of that standing charge and outcomes payment. Some service providers are also willing to take on some of the financial risk or have skin in the game. Some of our proponents have been willing to invest their own capital into their service. And finally, a considerable risk for service providers is reputational risk. When you enter into a social impact investment transaction, you are often putting your service under a level of scrutiny and evaluation and assessment that may not have been there previously. Therefore, you as a service provider need to understand and need to be confident that the outcomes that you are proposing to deliver are achievable. What does financial viability or feasibility look like? Using this chart, we can see on the left that under business as usual or the status quo, government will incur a certain level of cost. Through entering into the social impact investment transaction, the service provider and government seek to achieve better outcomes and thereby reduce the cost to government of a particular social issue. On the right, the savings generated by the success of the social impact investment are shown in the green bar as the potential savings that are achieved by the social impact investment. It is these savings that go to support outcomes payments and make the ability to return capital to the investors. So what is financial viability? When assessing the financial viability of a social impact investment proposal, it is critical to determine whether the potential costs of the social impact investment and the outcomes that are achieved will result in savings to the New South Wales Government compared to business as usual. On the previous slide, we saw, represented by the green bar on the right-hand side of the chart, the potential cost savings that would accrue as a result of the successful implementation of the social impact investment. Let's look at how those savings are applied under a social impact investment transaction. As discussed earlier, payments to service providers are made in the form of a standing charge. This standing charge will represent a proportion of the cost of delivering and financing the service. They will not represent 100% of those costs. So therefore, a service provider and an investor is reliant on the level of outcomes that are achieved and therefore the ability to receive outcomes payments in order for the service provider to meet their service delivery and financing costs and provide a return of capital and a return on investment to the investor. The third element is the savings that is retained by government. We are able to use these to reinvest into better services for vulnerable people in New South Wales. The final element for a service provider when looking at the costs of their service under a social impact investment is to consider the full cost, both the cost of delivering the service and the financing cost that may be required to meet any cash flow shortfalls arising from the different timing of payments of the standing charge and outcomes payments. What a service provider needs to be able to calculate and needs to be confident that they are achieving is a balance between their cash outflows and cash inflows throughout the life of the investment. The cash inflows to an organisation or service provider are comprised of payments from government in the form of the standing charge and the outcomes payments, and also additional funding and payments generally used to cover the financing costs. These can come from sources such as a commercial loan or through their philanthropic funding and their philanthropic arrangements. While in this example, we've indicated 4 different types of cash inflows that an organisation may receive, not all investments will follow this same path, and it is important for a social impact investment service provider to really understand what is the right mix of funding and cash inflows that they will need in order to successfully deliver the program and ensure financial viability and feasibility to themselves, their investors and government. Let's now move on to looking at the outcomes rate card. The outcomes rate card is one option that reduces the complexity of measurement frameworks. It is a tool that has been used by governments overseas to develop multiple outcomes-focused projects and to deliver a simplified social impact investing contract arrangement. Essentially, an outcomes rate card is a list of the outcomes that government seeks to achieve through an investment and the price range that the government is willing to pay to achieve each of those outcomes. The rate card simplifies measurement by providing more data prior to the commencement of a social impact investment transaction. This requires a lot more work upfront by government, but benefits all parties in the long run. The chart that we see on slide 14 is an illustrative example of a rate card for a high-risk offender and the types of payments that may be able to be attracted through a social impact investment seeking to reduce reoffending. The key features of this rate card include the cohort definition, who is your target population, the primary outcomes, what are the most important measures of impact from your investment, secondary outcomes, these will be contributing outcomes that will also demonstrate the ability to sustain the primary outcomes. The final element is the maximum that a service provider can be paid for delivering a particular set of outcomes for a particular individual. This is important because what this does is it puts a cap on the maximum value that a service provider is likely to receive in the best case scenario for achieving the outcomes under the service provision. We at the Office of Social Impact Investment are actively exploring the implementation of the rate card approach because we realise that we need to make things as simple but also as rigorous as we possibly can in order to continue to grow the social impact investment market. So putting all of the elements of financial feasibility together, the cost to government under business as usual, the potential cost of the social impact investment, the forms of payments to the service provider, and the retained savings to government, what does your typical social impact investment financial arrangement look like? The short and simple answer is that they are all different. I won't try and explain in detail each of the financial mechanisms used in the Resolve and the New PIN and the on-track investment, but I think it's clear by looking at the different capital raises, return of principal, financial payments, and potential returns to investors that you can see that in each instance we have a different scenario and a different financial mechanism in place. It is fair to say that this situation has arisen because the social impact investment market is a new market, and government, service providers and investors are all testing what is an appropriate form of financial arrangement. As we get more mature and as we get more experienced with these investments, we will find that it is more appropriate to move to things such as the rate card approach, and that is our hope here in New South Wales. So to finish this video, in addition to having the technical skills to develop a financial model, every organisation looking to prepare a proposal for social impact investment needs to think of these following questions. Firstly, have you accurately costed the service delivery element of your proposal? Do you have rigorous data and rigorous assessment of the potential savings from reduced services that the outcomes from your social impact investment will deliver? This in turn leads to the question, how much will government save? And will that be sufficient to incentivise government to enter into a contract? Next, you need to have a clear understanding of which government departments will bear the cost of entering into the social impact investment, and also which departments will receive the benefits from a successful outcome in your contracting arrangement. It's important to understand these because these will be the departments who are your partners throughout the life of the investment. And finally, Do you have sufficient savings to allow returns to investors? These returns are both in the form of returning their capital investment and providing an appropriate financial reward for the risk that these investors have taken. So that brings us to a close on this final video in the 4 videos that we've put together around preparing a social impact investment proposal. I hope that you have found this video and the others in our series informative and enjoyable. Again, should you wish to get further information on any of the videos and on any of the content that we've included in these videos, I urge you to visit our website where we have many online resources, or send us an email and we will happily arrange a time to chat with you, or send us a tweet and we'll do the same. Okay, so again, thank you very much everybody, and we look forward to receiving all your great proposals in the future. Bye now.